Hi, mystery writers. Welcome to spring. I have a lot of allergies from the trees, so bear with me if I sniffle and sneeze. My apologies. All right, today I want to talk about if your supporting characters are doing the right job. Um, they move the story forward, and we want to look at the relationship to story context and how that influences how you write your characters. So, what is the first thing you need to know about your supporting character? If you're a beginning writer, you've probably examined several character worksheets to help you flesh out your characters, and those worksheets often begin with height, weight, hair color, um, background, early childhood wound, and the like. But the most important aspect for each character is their context in the story. So I highly encourage you, if you have character background sheets, have some kind of character Bible, that you add that attribute to your character. What is their context in the story? So context is the element that makes your character important in this story. A character can be intriguing or charming or sexy or menacing and any other aspect. But if they don't have a story context, you might as well throw them away. So what is story context? Context is a way the character moves in the story. When you know the prime aspect of each character, you'll end up with just the right amount of characters in your story. You won't have too many and you won't have too few. And you won't go off story by emphasizing a minor character because they're fun to write. So just as each scene moves the story forward, each character must impact the story and in relation to the main character, the protagonist and the antagonist. So writer-director Adam Sculter calls it context, and I really like that word. I encourage you to follow Adam Sculter on YouTube. He has a lot of amazing videos about story. Anyway, define the story situation the character deals with in the story. So, and know their personal conflict. So, start with first things first about your character. What is their role in the story? All right, and what is their intent in relation to main characters, and what is their own personal conflict? And I suggest that you define these three aspects for each supporting character: their role in story, their intent in relation to the main characters, and their own personal conflict. When you do that, you're going to automatically create a three-dimensional character because you have their relationship to the story and their relationship to the main characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, and they're dealing with their own personal conflict. So the character's role in the story is how that character supports the main storyline. How do they support the main storyline? Do they support the protagonist by giving advice when she's unclear? Is the character a tool manipulated by the antagonist? Is he the love interest in a subplot for your kick-ass heroine? Just know what their role in this story is. And your supporting character's intent defines the relationship to the main character. Are they there to hinder or support the main character? Are they there to hinder or support the antagonist? And when you're clear about that supporting character's intent, you can express their desire in subtext. And the subtext is how that character acts within the context of the story. So you, the short version, the takeaway of this is you want to know how that supporting character works in the story. So then each character has their own personal conflicts, and this conflict can put them at odds with the main character, and that helps you build tension in your story. And as we know, and we've talked about before, tension keeps readers turning pages. The elements of context solidify how your character works to move the story forward. When you're clear about a character's role in the story, you know which scenes they'll occupy and how they will help or block the main character and what conflicts they will build. So once you know the character's role in the story, then you can build their background. So that's why I think getting their role in the story first is so important. You know how they're going to function in the story, and then you build their background to help you create that character as they perform that role in your story. And you can play with all the traditional character elements. Physical details may enhance the context or be neutral. Identifiers like hair color enrich your character, but they don't really change the context. And you can change the character's hair color without impacting the story. So now you can add that intriguing, charming, sexy, menacing details that enrich your character for the reader because you know their role in the story and you know how they're going to work in the story, and that helps you when you're actually writing the story. So let's talk a little bit more about this and how character role is just a little bit different than story context, because beginning writers often set up archetypes for characters, and it's easy to get lost in archetypes. And not just archetypes, but they can use personality trait indicators and all those things that people use to define their characters. And you want to add each different archetype role to your story: the mentor, the sidekick, the skeptic, and the love interest, and the like. But the key to using archetype character roles resides in how the character functions to achieve effects in the story. And context is the way to use the characters no matter what their archetypal role is. So for me, and I think this will help you if you kind of get your thinking centered about this, about that character's context in the story, that is what you think about first. How do they work in the story? How do they move the story forward? How do they relate to the protagonist? How do they relate to the antagonist? And oftentimes how they relate to other characters. But you want to know how that character is going to work in the story. And this is a great way to think about. I've actually seen this in film scripts. Is bad guy 1, bad guy 2, bad guy 3. You may not need all those bad guys. You may just need one to develop the context of the story. So you want to make sure that the character role plays an integral part in your story. And if you create a mentor for your protagonist, remember that the mentor's main role is not to give wise advice, but to give advice that moves the story forward. And there's a difference. For instance, a mentor may give wise advice, and the protagonist doesn't agree. They ignore that wise advice for whatever their reasons are. And but because they ignore the advice, something bad happens, which is easy to write about and easy to think about. And so that advice, even though it's not taken, is still moving the story forward. But having your mentor just give wise quotes isn't moving the story forward. I'm not sure if I made that clear, but it's really important. It's like whatever a character does needs to move the story forward, just like a scene needs to move the story forward. So that the mentor, continuing on with the mentor as an example, the mentor challenges the protagonist's decision and action and forces him to go in a new direction. The mentor's function in this story is to create a challenge, and that's the context. Alright, if you just have your protagonist and their mentor sitting around with the mentor spouting words of wisdom and aphorism and the like, that's not really moving the story forward. And I think that's another place where beginning writers get stuck. They're like, oh, but this is character development. But it's not. It's not. You can do that same thing by limiting those words of wisdom. I'm still using this one example. Limiting those words of wisdom, but the words of wisdom that come out are something that positively or negatively affects the protagonist. So for instance, if it's negative, just like I mentioned before, and they don't follow their mentor's wise words of wisdom, then whoops, the mentor was right, and the reader knows this, and your protagonist made a bad choice, and they walked into trouble. So your characters support the story, and so if you think of it as the story coming first and the characters fitting into the story, their context, then your supporting characters are doing the right job in your story because they function to develop the story. They support the protagonist and the antagonist to create tension by creating obstacles and diverting the main character's attention or setting it back on track and generally complicating the storyline. So a writer can like a character so much they add scenes and dialogue just to put more of the character in the story. And this is another first-time writer mistake. The character is fun to write, and so you put more of that character in there, and it's easy to let beginning writers to let a character or two take over the story, and that's not what you want. If you are clear from the beginning about a character's context in the story, you won't have that happening. You want your supporting characters to reinforce the story but not take over. So context is the way to keep your supporting characters in line with your story. And when you focus on how the character is moving through the story, you won't go wrong. Character details get readers involved, and they feel as though they know the character. But your job as a writer is to keep the character in context. Okay, that's what I had to offer today, and I feel it's so important. And if you think about context, if you're truly thinking about your character's context in the story, you're going to keep the reins on. You're going to keep them from running away with the story, and you won't overburden your story with too much of supporting character just because you like writing about them. If you're always thinking about how that character fits in the story and what they're doing to move the story forward, it doesn't matter what color their hair is or whether they're short or tall or slim or fat. It's that they have a role to to the story and they have a context in the story and they're doing their job to move the story forward. I think this is especially important to remember when you're writing your story scene by scene, because the characters who are in that story, the main character and any supporting characters, and often for us as mystery writers, the supporting characters are the suspects, then we want to make sure that that suspect, supporting character, is really moving the story forward, that they're causing problems for your protagonist. So I hope that helps, and I hope, especially for beginning writers, because I know there are quite a few in this group, that you really consider story context first. It's going to save you a lot of time when you're writing, and it's also going to save you a lot of rewrites when you realize that a supporting character is taking up too much time or space, however you think of it, in a certain chapter or a certain scene, because they've gone off track and they've kind of taken the reins and led off. So I know, let me just clarify, because I know for some people, you've heard me talk about letting the characters' actions and words that come to you as you're writing drive the story. And yes, you want that to be true, but especially for supporting characters, you want to make sure that what they're doing is actually moving that story forward and keeping their role, their story role, in context. We don't need a lot of ad libs from supporting characters. We want them to do their job, to support the story, and to have that important place without taking over. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Please add your comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about this. I don't hear a lot of people talk about character context when they're talking about developing characters, so I'd love to hear your take on character context. All right, thank you. See you next week.